Welcome to Glow for Hope, sparking conversation on mental health, where we break the silence, build community, and ignite hope. We're here to talk about what really matters: mental health, wellness, and the conversations that help us all feel seen and supported. Every episode will bring real stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you navigate mental wellness and suicide prevention. Because together, we can change the conversation. Let's get started. Welcome back to Glow for Hope, sparking conversation on mental health. I'm your host, Kelly Pelker, and today's conversation is one that I think a lot of people, especially men, are going to connect with on a very real level, because we talk a lot about showing up, pushing through, handling responsibilities, being strong, but we don't talk nearly enough about what's happening underneath all of that. The pressure, the exhaustion, the emotional weight people carry quietly while still trying to function every single day. And the truth is, there are a lot of men out there right now who are doing everything they're supposed to do on the outside, while internally they're struggling. So today is not about the polished version of someone's story. This is not a motivational highlight reel. This is about the human side of rebuilding, the mental and emotional toll life can take on us, and what happens when someone reaches a point where they realize something has to change. Joining me today is Carey. Many people know Sean through his message around discipline, ownership, and personal growth through his brand, Unselfishly Selfish. But today we're going deeper than the message itself. We're talking about the man behind it. So, Sean, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Kelly. Thank you.
I want to start in a place most people probably don't. Before the message, before the brand, before the version of you people see now, who were you when things weren't working?
That's a great question. And when things weren't working, I was a man who hid behind what he had already done. I continued to lead as I led when things were going well, but it wasn't working. So in the process of doing that and taking control and being the entrepreneur and being the dad and trying to be the husband, I basically lost myself in the process because I put so much effort into protecting my kids and hiding from what was really going on because I was embarrassed. Because as a man, as a husband, as a father, as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to put on the game face. You're supposed to show up even when things are bad. But the problem with that is if you're not filling your own cup, if you're not taking care of yourself first, you slowly wither away. And I became a fraction of the man that I once was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess we could back up a little bit here and say, what exactly were you going through? I think you had some issues with a wife that was an alcoholic, I believe.
So, yes. So, as I like to say, I don't really like to say, but as I often say, we were being hijacked by alcoholism.
Mm.
And this goes all the way back to 2006. So I'll set the timeline. 2006, I'm an entrepreneur with multiple businesses. My son is 5, my daughter is 3. Um, we have the happy, clappy family. We have the beautiful wife. I have the BMW. I have the house that symbolizes success. And slowly things started to fall apart. And when you're in that situation, you try to avoid the things that maybe are happening, but you don't want them to be happening.
Mhm.
I'm so focused on being successful and growing my businesses, and my then wife at the time was going to be taking care of the kids, and I wanted to have this happy family. And I watched as she slowly used alcohol as a vice, and I continued to move forward in the world that I was in. And fast forward to 2015, it was Christmas Eve. Things just, as they say, the shit hit the fan.
Mm.
And the police were at our house. My son called the police. She was taken from the house and never to come back. And that process continued to escalate. But while this is happening, I'm still trying to put up that front that, you know, um, I'm the entrepreneur, like I said, and I was a minor league baseball player, and I was you know, fitness professional. So I'm looking the part. I have all the things things in place, except for the one thing I couldn't control, which was what she was doing. But I put so much effort into try to focus on what I could control, or I thought I could control, that that's when the process started to unravel. You know, that's when I realized that I can't make somebody else do something that they're not willing to do,
Right.
but I also can't hide from it either. And I think
It,
that's what I was doing. Yeah. Yeah. I was
yeah,
holding it all
it's
inside.
entrepreneurial mental health is a whole nother ball game, and then you add to that the stressors of the alcoholism, and that's a lot to be dealing with. And did did people around you know how hard things really were?
Well, as you always find out, hindsight is 2020, right, Kelly? So while we were going through this process, I did everything in my power to protect my kids, and to try to hide the truth, because I can't, like I said, I was embarrassed. You
Hmm.
know, here I am. This is, I have a family here. I'm supposed to be the leader of my family. I'm supposed to be protecting my family, but inside those four walls, it was chaos. It was
Yeah.
utter chaos. And what I've realized is that, you know, hiding from that, and isolating myself, and that's what many men do, right? When we
Mhm.
find ourselves in a painful situation, um, many of it, the first thing we do is we retreat, not from the situation, but we retreat from telling other people,
Yeah.
because we think it's a reflection on who we are. You know, like, it wasn't my fault that my ex-wife decided to use alcoholism as a vice, and it basically destroyed our family. But it was my fault that I didn't want to seek help to help me go through that process as well.
Hmm.
And I think the hardest part, when I look back, and when you say, did people know? Yes, of course, the people closest to me knew, my parents knew, but even at that, my mom wrote me a letter one time because she was afraid to talk to me about it. This is what happens, is that we put up a wall, right?
Hmm.
So the people that even love us, and care about us, and the people that we trust, we push them away as well,
Yeah.
because it's a place where we think that, it's almost like the child that goes, if I do this, nobody's going to see me,
Hmm.
right? And we're adults. And that's what I was doing. I was saying, well, if I kept this happy clappy lifestyle, and I kept coaching the teams, and going to all the events, and doing all the things that I did as a happy dad, nobody would realize it. But then slowly things came up. And
Hmm.
as they came out, I almost felt like I was defending the situation. Well,
Right.
yeah, sometimes things happen, or, you know, it's not as bad as it seems, or all of these other excuses, right? We don't want to live in the truth.
Right. So was she like not was she showing up to the games and all of that stuff for the kids, and was she
For yeah,
under
for
the influence at the time and things were going on, or were you making excuses as to why she wasn't there?
yes, yes, and yes. So she was showing up, and it was eventually becoming an embarrassment, because she was showing up intoxicated. Because here's the thing. Let me preface this by saying, I don't take this situation as far as alcoholism lightly. I've done a lot of
Hmm.
research myself, especially being the spouse of an alcoholic, and also having kids who are the children of an alcoholic, because that's a whole nother story.
Hmm.
However, nobody chooses to be an alcoholic. It's not like she got up one day and she said, "Hey, you know what? I want to drink myself to death," because
Right.
that's what she ultimately did. And I want to destroy my family, and I want to lose my job, and I want to lose my friends. I want to lose my family. No, nobody gets up and does that.
Hmm.
Just like addiction, whether it be painkillers or heroin or whatever the thing is, But the challenge with alcoholism is that it's a socially acceptable drug.
Right.
And there are millions of alcoholics walking around amongst us every day that are living what we consider to be perfectly normal lives until they're not normal anymore. And I
Well,
think that's what
the
happened with,
functional alcoholic.
yeah, we call it the functional alcoholic. I call it trying to live normally. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I think that's what happened. So at the beginning, yes, showing up, helping out at the school. She was working her part-time job, but she was also helping out. I was the coach, so I was never in the stand. So I would be with the baseball kids. And then eventually, as things slowly got worse, we we kind of went our separate ways. It was the kids would ask her not to come because it was an embarrassment. There were things that were happening, the fall down and, oh, I just slipped. It was my flip flops, or it was this, and there were things that continued to happen. And I think what we do once again is, we want to make sure that the kids are safe, but we also want to make sure that the kids aren't isolated. So I let it continue to happen. I continue to say, well, yeah, come to the game, but then eventually it got to the point where it wasn't safe for her because of driving, and it wasn't safe for the kids because of their mental health. The
Yeah.
burden that was placed on them every time they were wondering, what's going to happen now. And I think that's the part that we don't think about. I always thought about protecting the kids, but I never thought about what they were thinking about emotionally,
Yeah.
especially me. I mean, I know what I went through, and
Right.
that's spouse. That's not my wife. I mean, that's not my mom.
Yeah,
You
we tend to think that they're so resilient that, oh, they're not gonna remember it. They'll get over it so easy, and it sticks with them.
It sticks with them, and it's okay. As I say, it's okay to not be okay. And that's one thing that we actually did. Myself, I went through biblical counseling, and it wasn't something that I was open to it at the beginning. I was very adverse to it at the beginning. And then they also had counselors, because it's not normal. To live in that kind of environment is not normal. And then to continue to live in that environment is normal. And one of the
Mhm.
things I had to finally decide in my own head was, do I want my kids to live in a broken home, or did I want them to be from a broken home? And I finally made the decision that, hey, you know what? They're going to be from a broken home, because one way or another it was chaos. So do we create a situation where, okay, mom's not going to show up when she's supposed to show up to come see you anyway, but at least you're not dealing with it in your own house.
Mhm. So was
And
she trying to get any kind of help or counseling or anything like that, or did she just, like, in complete denial, or
at the beginning, yes. However, again, as I said, it's a socially acceptable situation. So when all of your friends are doing it, and these are the people that are important to you, or you think that are important to you, although your family should be your first priority, you just continue to go about that lifestyle. And until you decide that you must change, not want to change, but must change, you'll
Mhm.
continue to do what you do. And the problem with alcoholism, it's a progressively worsening disease. You either stop, but you don't just cut back. People, they think they're going to, but they don't. Okay, you just either continue to drink, and then as stress continued to happen in her life, it got worse and worse. It became an all day, every day, as opposed to a vice. And then the final straw is that, I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but the one drug that you have withdrawals from that can actually kill you is alcohol, because of the seizures and all the things that go along with it.
Mhm.
And you can't just do it on your own. When you get to that point, when you get over that threshold of it's all day, every day, and the wine turns into the vodka, and the vodka turns into whatever you can get your hands on, doesn't matter. Doesn't even, you're not even drinking it because it tastes good. You're doing it because you have to. That's what happens. And then the backlash, which is everything that happens, beyond that. It's kind of like a tornado. You see it coming in, and you start seeing it flipping things up in the air, and then it hits you, and then it's gone, and then you're left in shambles.
Hmm.
But it doesn't
Great
happen that
analogy. Yeah. So when you don't talk about what you're going through, where do those emotions go?
They go to a lot of places that you don't want them to go. Some of it goes into anger. Some of it goes into resentment. Some of it goes into lying to yourself. It's a series of recognizing, avoiding, making excuses, then going through that same process again. As much as you can do it so that you don't have to take responsibility. And I think that's one of the things that when we start talking about just in general, men in general,
Mhm.
we're wired to be leaders and protectors. That's just the way we're made. I believe that's the way our creator made us. That doesn't make women any less important. It just that's physically that's the way we're made. And mentally we're wired that way as well. So when you're holding on to all of this, whether it be hurt, anger, resentment, confusion, misunderstanding. I mean, there's so many words I could probably use.
Mhm.
It doesn't always come out in a way that is beneficial to the people around you. And the one person that I think when we talk about how this affects people, the one person that we break the most promises to in the world is often who?
Ourselves.
Yeah. So I kept telling myself, "Oh, I'm gonna get the restraining order." I went to the courthouse 3 months earlier, held on to it, held on to hope. Oh, I'm gonna start doing some counseling so that I don't have to build this up inside of me, But I'll start on Monday, and then like I make these promises of that I was going to do, but then I never did it.
Why do
And
you think that is?
that's a great question. I think part of it was fear
Mhm.
because it's a fear of the unknown. It's
Right.
it's do you continue to live in an environment that is chaotic, but it's familiar? Or do you cross over that line and make a decision that is going to change your life, your kid's life, and your eventual ex-spouse's life and everybody around you? That's a difficult decision to make, and it's a huge burden to hold.
How much of it was centered around feeling bad for her and what was she going to do? Was there any did that come into play, or where you put you were worried so much more about her than yourself, or not necessarily the kids, but do you know what I'm saying?
So again, I think there was a process I went through. Originally, at the beginning, it was definitely worried about like, what are you doing to yourself? Why are you doing this? You know, uh, this is going to get worse. And then eventually, it got to a point where, and I mean, I used to be embarrassed to say this, but we're talking factual and we're talking the truth. I got to the point where I was wishing that she would drive into a telephone pole so she wouldn't cross the center line and ruin two families, because that's the level of anxiety and stress that it creates within you. And I'm not proud to say that, but I'm
That's right.
being very transparent that at the beginning it was fear of, oh, you're ruining your life physically, you're ruining your life mentally, why are you doing this to yourself, to the point where, you know what, I'm throwing my hands up in the air, I can't help you, you don't want to help yourself, then you know at least we don't put the burden on our family or some other family.
Right.
Now, with that being said, as I mentioned, she passed away. So that happened in 2022. So we got divorced between 15 and 16. It was an 18-month process, which again, a whole series of stress, because when you're trying to rationalize with an irrational person, and you're my only thing was I wanted to make sure I got the kids.
Mhm.
And eventually the court saw through the situation. It took a while for that to happen because her lawyer was convinced, and maybe he also wanted to make some money, who knows, but he was convinced that she wasn't as bad as she was. And when we finally got to that point, uh, that's the only time I could start my healing. But going back to the fact that in 2022, she died. Now I'm already years into my comeback. My kids have become, I don't want to say immune to the situation, but they knew what it was. I mean, they weren't spending a lot of time with their mother because she wasn't in a place mentally, emotionally, and physically to do that, because it took a toll on her body and on her mind.
And how old were the kids then?
So at that point, it was the week before my daughter started her freshman year of college. She passed away. So my daughter was 18,
Mm-hmm.
and my son was 21. But we had been dealing with this. Remember, this is from 2006,
That's a lot.
right?
Long
So this was
time.
years. And I think the challenge I had is that now she's got a fiance at the time, and my kids were considered that obviously the next of kin. My son being of age, he would have been the next of kin. But I stepped in and did what I normally do: is I took responsibility for the funeral and for all of the things that needed to be done, because she was 2 states over. I live in Rhode Island. When she passed away in New Hampshire. So there was a logistical nightmare here as well. So there was a bunch of things that happened, and not to get into the details, but from a mental standpoint, I was in a good place. I had already made my comeback. My first book was already halfway written, was ready to be published. I was coaching other men. My kids were in a great place. My daughter had just graduated from high school with honors. She was a all division track athlete. My son had 2 businesses going. I mean, we
That's
were
amazing.
in a good place, right? uh, in spite of her situation. But then it all came back. It was almost like, and in some ways, there was a sense of relief
Mhm.
because the chaos was over. But in other ways, I went through a series of emotions. I went through some regret. I went through some guilt. And then I had to go through some forgiveness. And I think that was the process of all the things that I had done through my comeback. I think the hardest part was those 3 things, because I didn't really have any guilt or regret when she was still alive, because I felt like, hey, we went our separate ways. She chooses this life. My kids are in a good place. I've got full custody of the kids. I did my thing. One's going off to college, the other one's in business. Like, we made it. Like, we're in a good place now, right? And then, boom.
Boom.
And I think the if I could say, my daughter was the one who put it in the best words. After I'd moved her into college, we're walking and I'm getting ready to leave. And it's emotional for a variety of reasons, because one, she's my daughter, and I have an amazing relationship with my daughter. And number two, because of the situation that happened a week earlier. And she looked at me and she said, Dad, I really wish not that she was here or not here, but that I had the choice of whether I wanted her to be here or not be here. Because there were so many times when they didn't want her at an event or anything because they knew it was going to turn into a disaster, but she no longer had that choice.
Wow.
And
That's
I
hard.
think as a father, it's like, I mean, even talking about it right now, it brings up the emotion. And as a father, I just said to her, you know what, Meg, I completely understand that. Because even though all the things that we'd gone through, I was going through a similar set of grief. My grief was different than their grief, but it was still some grief. And a lot
Mhm.
of mine had to be centered around the forgiveness part. And I think that's one of the things especially as men, I see this all the time, we hold on to resentment.
Yeah.
Right? We hold on to it, like, and we don't realize it. It becomes like kryptonite within our body, because so many of the things that we do are then fueled by that resentment instead of by
Logic.
yeah, or just, yeah, exactly. We're not thinking logically. We're thinking completely emotionally.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think, that's something to seriously consider. So if you're holding on to something that's not serving you or even the person that you are holding on to it for, that you like, think about it. Is it really worth carrying that burden? If I said to you, you got 10 people in your life that you won't forgive, and I put 10 bricks in a backpack and had you walk around with it for the rest of your life, would you want to do that? Because that's technically what you're doing.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
at some point in your life, those bricks may be a little lighter for one person and a little heavier for another person. But the reality is, you're walking around with a backpack of anger and resentment that isn't serving you, or certainly not serving the people that you love.
Hmm. That's a way. Good analogy. Good way to put it. That's a lot of weight to carry around. And so during any time of all this chaos that was going on in your life during that season of life, were you ever ready to throw in the towel and from a mental side and give up on life or
So, Kelly, I've done a lot of podcasts, and you're the first person that's asked me that question. And not because I've never wanted to answer it, I just never was the one to bring it up.
Mhm.
And in full disclosure, there was a time when I asked myself, is it just worth it? I think the term that I would use at the time was, I felt like I was in a room with no doors. There was no exit to this situation. And it was more so when we were still living in the chaos. It
Mhm.
was it was 2015 in prior. So between that 2006 and 2015. And yes, the answer is yes. I had a few moments where I said, is this really worth it? But the one thing that kept me focused and kept me in a place where, I can't do this, is my kids, because I
Mhm.
wasn't going to do this to them. It's in some ways, and this may come across wrong for some people on the other side, but I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to influence people. I think of taking your own life as being very selfish, regardless of the situation. Now, there are people who have mental health issues to do that, but the people that are left behind, like your children, are the ones who are left to suffer.
Mhm.
Now, that no way minimizes mental health, because I went through it, believe me. But it's a tough decision to make, and the people that are left behind are the ones that really end up having the problem. And I've seen it. I've had one of my daughter's good friends. Her dad had done that. He'd basically hung himself, and I've just watched how that has been an emotional toll on their family. Um, how maybe at the beginning she felt it was her fault, and I didn't want to do that to my kids. They had already lost one parent, not figuratively, but in
Mhm.
many ways. I
Mhm.
couldn't do that to them. And but yeah, it was a there was a consideration there, and it
It is
was.
it is a lot, and I know from losing my own nephew that he had struggled from losing his cousin, and he knew what it he witnessed what it did to his family, to his mom, to his aunt, and to himself. And when I had a conversation with him when he was struggling, it was like, you saw what all of that did to everyone. Please don't put your mother through that. And it's still just in their minds. The world is still just better off without them. And but it's hard. And when you're constantly in crisis mode like that, trying to protect your kids, make the right decisions, hold on to everything, was anybody checking on you?
Yes. um my mom, my dad, they were very instrumental in helping not only myself but helping my kids through the process.
Mhm.
And as I said at the beginning, part of what I had done is I did a lot to push them away, because I said, I was embarrassed. It's not something that you're proud of. It's you don't get married to think that you're going to get divorced. You don't have a family to think that it's going to be destroyed by alcoholism. You don't enjoy watching the person that you once loved and create a family with destroy themselves one day at a time. And we talk about taking your own life. I mean, I think of alcoholism as slow suicide because inevitably she died. So like, anybody want to debate that with me? She watched her drink herself to death. What is that? It's a slow
Yeah.
suicide. And so my parents were always there, very instrumental. My father passed away in 2020, but he had an amazing relationship with my son. My daughter still has an amazing relationship with my mom, and they did the best they could. But let's face it, unless you're living in that situation, you don't really know what's going on.
Right.
That's one of the things with me. Some of the men that I coach, and I explain to them, guys, I'm not going to come here and sugarcoat things. I've been there. If you want my help, listen to me. Listen to somebody who's been there. Not somebody who's giving you some theory from some book that they read. Okay, but like, listen to what I'm telling you. And I'm not doing this because I want you to hurt you. I'm not doing this because I want you to feel like you did something wrong. But you got to live in reality. You got to take responsibility for what you can control. And that's the whole premise of how I did my own comeback, is that, yes, people can help you, but you got to help yourself, because nobody's going to come and save you from this situation unless you reach out and give them your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically what started to happen is I had to say, okay, what can I control? Well, I can control my own actions, my own behaviors, and my own responses. And I wasn't controlling any of those three. My responses were reactions. And I think there's a huge difference between when we start talking about responding and reacting. It's like that. A response is something that is done with intent. In most cases, a reaction is something that's done with emotion. And you can have a reaction that's ingrained through intent. So let's say, for instance, my kid's running out into the middle of the street. I might react and grab his arm. But I do that because I've known for years I'm protecting my kid. But when we start thinking about the things that, with my ex-wife, there were times when I think back and say, was I just too hard on her? Is that why she continued to drink? Because I tell her that she was destroying the family, and at some point you just get to the point where you just can't do it anymore.
Right.
And you start saying things and doing things that aren't helpful. And that's, that was some of the regret that I had, I think, after she had passed away.
It just kind of comes counterproductive at that point, and that's when you have to know that, okay, something has to change, because it's where we're going here. This path we're on can't continue. And I'm sure there was probably, was there a time when you kind of looked in the mirror and was like, okay, I just don't recognize this man that I've become?
Yeah. It's
I'm
funny.
getting you on all these questions,
Yeah,
aren't
no, this is good, Kelly. You're hitting the nail right on the head here. So there was, and it wasn't so much my moment. I call it a moment of clarity. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually was getting out of the shower one morning, and I've even written about this. I was getting out of the shower one morning, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I looked at myself and said, "Who who are you? Like that's not who you are physically." I mean, I was 35 pounds overweight. Now you got to understand, for those who don't know me, I was a fitness professional for most of my life. Still am at some level. I trained rock stars, professional athletes, moms, CEOs, you name them all, right? And I knew what I was supposed to do to take care of myself physically and mentally and emotionally, but I wasn't doing it. So for 18 months, I didn't exercise. I didn't do anything. And the synergistic relationship between motion and emotion is enormous. And I knew that if I didn't start doing something different, if I didn't start changing what I was doing, then nothing around me would change. So I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, this is ridiculous. You need to you need to do something. You can't live like this anymore. And actually, that's the first day I started back to exercise. And Kelly, now, shit you not, this was my complete training program. I did a 30-minute walk. I went 15 minutes in one direction and 15 minutes back home. And I said, I'm going to do it for 30 days. I'm going to commit to 30 days. Because like I said to you earlier, who's the one person in the world we break the most commitments to?
Yep.
It's ourselves, right? So I said, I'm not going to break this commitment. So I started doing that. I started listening to podcasts and just like mellow music and anything to just calm me down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I gradually built that up to getting back to the gym, training with intent, I lost all the weight, went from 235 to 190, 192. My blood pressure was 140 over 100.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's, as you know, it's hypertension, right? That was all self-induced. That wasn't something, well, I got a family history of coronary heart disease, so I have a high blood pressure. My blood pressure prior to that was 115 over 70, but for today it's probably 118 over 80. So when you think about that moment, yeah, the only thing that could change at that moment was me.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't fix her. I had the kids in counseling so I could help them. My businesses were falling apart. I was falling apart. My family had already fallen apart. So, shit, what do you do?
What do you have to lose besides just let's try to make a change here?
Yeah, not only try, it was I have to make a change.
Yeah.
It wasn't even like, oh, maybe I should try to do something different. No, you do something different, or you might be the one that's in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. So you talk a lot about ownership, discipline, and taking control of your life. And I think people hear that and sometimes think, I should just be able to fix this because, and especially as parents, we're fixers. I am a solution finder. I don't care what you bring me. I'm going to throw you out 3 unsolicited things, and that's the way it is. But in all honesty, what do you say to the man who feels like he can't take control right now? He just can't.
I'm going to tell him that the first thing he has to do is believe that he can. And here's what you need to start with. You may not be able to control what happened up to this point. But when you have that moment, when you look in the mirror, that's called your moment of recognition. And your moment of recognition is your moment of power. And what I mean by that is when you realize that you're saying, I can't change, you're knowing that you need to change. That's why you're saying it. So you may not be able to change everything that happened up to that point, but you have control of what you choose to do in that moment. It's no different than me saying I'm going to commit to 30 days of walking. Now, did I want to walk every day in the 30 days? Probably not. I don't remember at this point, but I'm going to guess that there were days when I was like, screw this, I don't want to go for a walk,
Mm-hmm.
But I had made that commitment to myself. So when they say they can't, maybe they can't make some monumental change in their life, but they can do one thing, something, whatever it might be. One thing. If it means they're gonna journal, or they're gonna write down what they're angry about, or they're gonna reach out to a friend, or they're going to take a walk, or they're gonna eat one healthy meal. I'm not sure what their situation is, but they can choose to do one thing that's going to put them in a better place than they were at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the thing, as I said, motion moves in motion. If we roll up in a ball, we're going to stay in a ball. But when we start to move, that momentum will start to build. But the first thing you have to do is you have to be in the truth. I had to look at myself and say, that's not me. And then I went, oh, yes, it is. But it's not the me that I want it to be. And I think many of us, men and women, we lie to ourselves. We lie to ourselves because if we face the truth, then that means that we know there's something wrong and something must change, that means we have to do something. And if that's the case, then we can't blame somebody else for it.
It's difficult to identify and accept our own shortcomings at times. And are there things that, okay, so you started the walking,
Mm-hmm.
and then was there like a next step after that, or did you go through a series of things that, okay, this really didn't help me, but this was, you realized you couldn't carry everything alone anymore, you had to get help?
So the walking was my first decision. This is right after I got the restraining order. But the first thing, ironically, I'm in the same office that this happened. Right after she was taken out of the house, and that's a whole nother story, but let's just say I went to the courthouse, got a restraining order. The restraining order was executed, and then I sat there and I asked myself three questions. I was in my office. Now, obviously, I was a bit relieved, but I was also in a very emotional state because you're like, now what, right? What's next? And as I was sitting in this office that I'm in right now, three questions came to my mind. Where am I? How did we get here? And where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of profanity laced at the time, but it was definitely those three questions. And and I will tell you, I looked on the bookshelf that's to my left where I'm standing right now, and I had a book that was on the shelf that drew me. It was called Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. It's 538 pages. And I went over to the bookshelf, I pulled the book off the shelf, and I looked at it, and I'm like, okay, why do I have this book? And this was 2015. There was a coupon from Walden's Books, which doesn't even exist anymore, right?
Right.
So for the young people on the podcast right now, just so you know, it was the old version of Barnes and Noble back when we bought books. And so I pulled this coupon out, and it expired in October of 2010. So I bought the book in 2010 with the intent to read it, and only read the first chapter and then put it away because I was in no mental state to do that. So I took the book off. I committed to reading the book. I said, there's something that drew me to this book. And I still have the coupon in a glass
Picture frame.
frame. Yeah, because it meant that much to me, and it's in front of me here.
Oh.
And so I read that book. So that was the next step in the process. I started to engage in podcasts and reading and things like this, just listening to other people who had gone through struggles and had something to share. And then I had a friend who I was going to high school with, who was also a friend of my ex-wife's at the time. And she had given me a business card of a pastor that she knew. And I had put it away a year earlier. And going to the post office, I reached into my console to mail some letters, and this business card came out and fell on the seat, in the pastor's seat. Now I looked at this thing. The place was called Grace Family Church. And now at the time, and I told you before this podcast that I'm a Christian, but at the time, this is 2015, I had on a scale of 1 to 10 of spiritual balance, I was probably a negative 47. And so I see this thing and I go, this card came up. And I come out of the parking lot, and directly in front of me is this church. Now, I had been to this post office probably in over the 30 years. I'd probably been to there 100 times, right? And I'd never seen the sign for this church. And so I went, and I ended up, long story short, I went to the door. The door was locked. I was like, thank God it's locked. And then 2 seconds later, he comes to the door, and he unlocks the door, and he invites me in. And then I started biblical counseling with him. Long story short, the first day that I start with him, I literally projectile vomit all over him with words about she did this and she did that and everything else. And the first thing he said to me after I was done is, "Are you finished?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm finished." He said, "From now on, it's no longer about her. It's about what you choose to focus on." From that point forward, everything that I did in my life, it was with focus. And the word I use now is intent.
Yeah.
And so yes, I was walking, then it was reading and getting immersed in positive things. I created a gratitude journal. I went to biblical counseling. I did it for a whole year. And then I started training harder and yada, yada, yada. But what I call that, Kelly, is I had to rebuild my relationship with myself.
Mm.
So once I took responsibility for where I was, understanding that, yes, maybe I didn't create the situation. Alcoholism wasn't something that we chose. However, I can control my own actions and behaviors and my responses to the actions and behaviors of others. So I had to choose to move forward from that day forward. And then in the process, going back to the day where I was feeling like I was in a room with no doors, that was a fraction of the man that I am today. And I had to rebuild that person. I had to rebuild him physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And that's a lot of work.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And kudos to you for doing as you did. So what would you say to men who were raised to believe showing emotion or asking for help makes them weak?
That's a good one. And it's still prevalent amongst men today.
Very much so.
So I would say that first I'd call bullshit on that. And then I would say that think of it this way. If you're holding all of that emotion inside, it's not creating a positive situation for you and for the people around you, and especially the people that you love. We as men are no different than women in the sense that we can't process emotion by holding on to it. We have to let it out. Now, it's okay for a woman to cry. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Society tells us, well, she's a woman, that's okay. But I think that when we start processing the idea of an emotion is something that's human, we're human beings. Again, I'm a Christian. I say the most masculine man that ever walked the face of the earth is Jesus Christ. And we all emulate to be like him as men if we do that. But he was also one of the most forgiving. He was an emotional man. He had all of these things, all of these qualities. And when I look at somebody who's struggling to process emotion, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to be around other men who are transparent, authentic, and vulnerable. And I think once you start being around other men like that, it becomes a safe place for you to do that. Because here's the deal. I would guarantee that every man that's listening to this podcast and every man that's ever lived at some point in their life has cried.
If not, they're lying to themselves.
Exactly. They're lying to us and they're lying to themselves. So, but with that said, why are they afraid to cry in a situation where they're in public or where they're around somebody else?
I think society is softening up on that, but there's still a long way to go.
I would totally agree. And I think there's two sides to that. I think we have a whole side of society that is demasculating men. And that could be a whole nother topic of conversation. And then you have the other side, which is the red pill side, where you have these guys that are just like trying to masculate men. And there's a happy medium somewhere in between. Listen, you can still be authentic, transparent, vulnerable, and emotional and be a masculine leader, protector. There's no correlation between, well, if I'm emotional, then that makes me weak. No. But I think to go back to your original question, if I'm telling other men how I feel about that, I say, get in a group of other men. So for me, I have what's called the Iron Circle Brotherhood. And one of the things that we have, I have guys from all walks of life. And when we do that, when we talk, it's like, guys, there's only one thing that we're concerned about, and that's the truth. Right? If you don't come here with real talk, if you don't come here and lay it on the table, then don't come. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear your cookie cutter response. And it's very similar to what you're doing right now, Kelly. We had this conversation before. It's like, I just want to have an authentic conversation. And I said, everything's open because I don't have anything to hide. All right.
Yeah.
Because the man who has nothing to hide is definitely the most powerful man in the room.
It's so hard to, male or female, i- to be vulnerable when you're in a leadership position and you're always looked at as the strong one and the one that everybody goes to. And, but then you also have to have your release too. And so where do you go with that? So, I mean, you've obviously chosen to share that back with the men that you're surrounding yourself with, which I think is awesome. Finding those kinds of groups is probably a challenge, but eh, well, I guess that goes back to what I started with as far as, when you're the leader and you're the strong one and everybody's looking up to you and following your word, that just puts a whole nother level of pressure and reason to not be vulnerable.
Or reason to be vulnerable
Mhm.
because we lead by how we live, Kelly. And when I think of, so I have a phrase that I love to share, and it's the ceiling of our ability to lead others is determined by the depth of our ability to lead ourselves.
Mm,
Think about that for a second.
that's pretty
The word
powerful.
depth is the key word on that. Because if you want to be a superficial leader, go ahead. But does that make you a true leader? Because I feel like the greatest position of leadership that you can have, and not everybody can do this. So let me take one step back. The greatest position of leadership that myself, and I think you stating that you have kids have, is to be a parent.
Mhm.
Because our kids will always watch what we do and emulate it, but not as often listen to what we do and follow it
Right.
because we lead by how we live.
Mhm.
And as a leader, you know, leaders are bestowed responsibility. I think the number one responsibility is to be who you are. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent. I work with some leaders. I work with some, especially some men who have been successful in industry, and a lot of them say the same thing you say. Well, people aren't going to respect me as much if if I don't bring in this front, or if I don't tell them like it's supposed to be. I said, but really, what makes you believe that? Well, I just that's the way it's always been. Well, just because that's the way it's always been doesn't mean that that's the way it has to always be.
I think a lot of that's it's just internalized and your own self. I mean, I can only speak for myself, I guess, but yeah, I remember it's like you can get to a point where you live two different lives, one at home, one out in the public in the workspace or in the entrepreneurial world. And I would go to these conferences and events and stuff that we put on, and I'm one person, but then I go home and I'm a totally different person to a certain degree. And then my son came to one of those events with me and saw how, people complimented me, saw me in a whole different light. And he literally, he was just in his teens, was like, it brought him to tears and was like, I just have never seen this side of you.
Well, let me ask you, Kelly, having those, we'll call them the three personalities, or the three leadership things that you had. After a while, doesn't it get exhausting to
Oh
try to
yeah.
have to be somebody at all these different places?
Hmm. It does. And you have a group of friends that are, I've got this group of friends for this way of me and this one for this one of me and this and it's like not one friend knew everything about me.
Well, I
Uh,
think there's a fine line between letting everybody know everything about you and actually just being your authentic self.
Yeah, and that's true. That probably sounded worse than it is because I still do believe that there's people in your life for different reasons and different seasons,
Absolutely.
and that's very very true.
So I do this exercise, with the men. I also do it when I speak, and I call it the eulogy exercise. And I ask the people to close their eyes and imagine they're at their funeral. And then I joke, I say, don't get all weird on me because none of us are getting out of here alive anyway. Right. So it kind of lightens the mood. But then I ask them to imagine their eulogy. But then I say to them, but it's only one sentence. One line defines your entire life.
Mm.
What would it say? The question then becomes, would it be about a person who loved, led, and served from a place of strength and purpose, authenticity? If not, then this is your moment, because leading yourself first isn't selfish. It's the most unselfish thing we can do for ourselves and others, ourselves and others. Because here's the thing: so many of us live a lie, Kelly. Like we try to keep all those balls in the air, right? We're juggling. It's like the guy at the circus, or the woman at the circus is trying to do teacups, and next thing you know, they're all over the place, right? We can't live like that forever.
No, it's hard to
And
keep up with after a while.
it's exhausting. It's exhausting, right? And I think about all the years that I did that, even when I was younger. I wanted to have this, my way or the highway, because that was what my football coach said, or no pain, no gain, and all this other stuff that was ingrained in my head. I'm
Hmm.
55 years old. So when I think about like what was like back then, well, that's the way we grew up. But I didn't raise my son like that. And I can tell you, my son's a very masculine guy. I mean, he's a hard worker. He has his own construction business. He doesn't take shit from anybody. And but I didn't raise him in the thing that he had to be. He's the first kid that says to me every day, every time he hangs up with me, "I love you, Dad." You know,
Great.
Even that. I mean, think about it, Kelly. One of the things that brings me to my father. So when my father passed away, I got the opportunity to do his eulogy, which doesn't always happen, especially in the Catholic Church, because they were in the Catholic, even though I'm Christian. And and I talked about how my father was very intentional in how he would always say, "I love you," not "love you" or "love you." "I love you." And I think just using that statement in our conversation that we're having, how many times do you come in contact with somebody, even somebody that you truly love, and you say, "Love you, love you"? I don't know. I think there's a lot more meaning when you add that one letter in front.
Hmm.
How powerful is it when somebody says, "I love you" versus "love you"?
Yeah, makes a big difference.
But I think that's all part of what we're talking about is being authentic. Listen, when that moment comes, that eulogy moment comes, you're not going to be here to change anything. So all of this stuff that you're going through right now, and believe me, I've been through some shit. We talked about it already. You know, at some point, it all comes to an end. This journey that we're on, it's a short journey. It may seem long, but like I told you, I'm 55, and I'm going, where did this go? Where did this go? 20 years ago is when my my wife at the time, her alcoholism started to rear its ugly head. That was 20 years ago, and here I am talking about it today. Like, time's gonna fly.
Yeah, we
So
can't wait to grow up, and then now it's like, okay, wait a minute, hold up, this is going too fast.
yeah, and even I think, I don't know about you, but as I've gotten older, I have become definitely more authentic and more transparent. I don't know if it's just because we gain wisdom. I always say life doesn't get any easier. We just get wiser, more resilient, and get to know ourselves better.
Right, right. These are all my wisdom highlights here. I quit covering those up, but I'm like, okay. I'm here. I'm pretty I'm not a sugar coater. I'm pretty straight to the point with most things, and but man, you can tell and identify people that just are so disingenuous. It's like so you kind of stepped back into to the fatherhood part for a minute. So that's how did going through all of that shape the kind of dad that you are today, and did it change how you openly talk with your kids and talk about emotions with them?
So being a dad has always been something I took great pride in. It was the most powerful title that I could ever have. And I don't mean power in controlling my kids. I
Right.
meant like it's the one that gave me the most purpose. And I think from the beginning, I was always been an active father. I'm the guy who, like, after my daughter was in gymnastics, I was a gymnastics dad, not the gymnastics mom, and I helped out. But I think having gone through the comeback portion certainly has made me appreciate the communication I do have with my kids now. Now, obviously, they're adults at this point, but as
Mhm.
I said to you earlier in the podcast, my daughter and I have a relationship with my daughter that most dads would die to have.
Do
But
you
that
think that you have that as a result of the lack of um I don't want to say the lack of a mother that she had in her life, but do you think it would have been the same?
and that's a great question. And I was about to say that is that I think it was it was always there because I always spent I always let me be intentional. I always invested time with my kids.
Mhm.
It was always a priority. However, because the lack of ability for her to communicate with her mom in a positive way because of everything that was going on, it it required me by default to step up and be involved in those moments where you know as she's growing up and she's having women issues, or she has a breakup with her boyfriend, or you know she has a problem at school. Like, those were all things that I took care of. And
Mhm.
I guess we could say that if there were two parents, it might have been a little different. I still think I would have been involved to a high level. However, I don't know if the communication part, especially in some areas that were what we call mom things, would have been would have been as involved. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's for sure a valid point.
Yeah, and that please that's not to lessen the involvement that you had at in by any means, but it's
Not at all. I don't take it personal at all. I think that it is what it is. Those are the facts that yes, some men don't have that ability because their spouse takes over especially the female side of things, the daughter stuff. Do I wish that my daughter had a better relationship with her mom? Of course. I think
Mhm.
that's important. That's necessary. Just like a boy needs a positive male role model in his life, so too does a woman need to be a role model for her daughter.
Mhm. What do you want your children to understand about mental health and emotional struggle that maybe your generation of men wasn't taught?
At some point in your life, you're going to struggle with it. Maybe something in your life happens, like we did, and maybe something that you bring upon yourself. It may be something that's in your DNA,
Mhm.
but it's okay. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay in that place. There's help. You can get help. you can go for professional help. You can speak to anyone. You can always talk to me. And I think many a times my kids are very similar in many ways and very different in other ways. My daughter's always been the voice of reason, and it's just been her way. And when she says something, you want to listen because usually it's something of value because she doesn't always say things. My son and I, we're so much alike. I mean, we're just full blown ADHD people. Fortunately, I've learned how to. I have coping mechanisms that have helped me, and I'm trying to help him do the same. But we're just like, and when he's mad, you know he's mad. When he's happy, you know he's happy. And I'm kind of the same way. Uh, but the problem with that is sometimes we create a lot of our own problems. So when we're really happy and then things don't go the way it's supposed to go, we crash and burn. And when we're really angry, everybody around us is walking on eggshells. And I think that's part of mental health is being able to create some type of regularity in your body now or in your mind. And I don't think it's done in a way where it's like, oh, I shouldn't have emotions. It's recognizing those emotions, just like recognizing that you're struggling with something mentally. Hey, if you had a headache and it lingered for 3, 4, 5 days, you'd go to the doctor, right? Well, if you have a heartache or you have something that's been lingering for 6, 8, 12 months and you feel like you want to jump off a bridge, then you need to go to a doctor as well. It's okay. It's not something, and even if it's just finding somebody you can speak with, like you don't have to carry this burden alone. If you don't want to speak to me, then talk to your best friend about it. That's why they're your best friend.
Yep.
But it's
And
it's not there's nothing wrong with you if you're struggling with some type of mental or emotional imbalancement. It's part of life. That's why we're human beings.
mhm, very much. So would you say that that kind of, well, let me just pose it this way. What part of your story do you think people need to hear more of that maybe doesn't get talked about enough?
I think the part that probably was most instrumental in getting me to where I am today was realizing that I can only control, like I said, my own actions and behaviors and my responses to the actions and behaviors of others. As leaders, we try to control so many things that are outside of our control. And it not only drains us, but it also weakens our ability to lead. We have to lead ourselves first. And that's why the whole concept of unselfishly selfish, it sounds contradictory at first, right? Unselfishly selfish. How can you be that way? But it's not about putting ourselves above others. It's recognizing that when we take care of ourselves first, we become fit for the duty of leading those we love and serve. And I think that's the part of the story that I learned after the fact is that I felt like I had to try to keep putting out the fire, and I had to keep doing it by myself.
Mhm.
And it really, I couldn't put the fire out. That's was her job. But I could control how I handled it. Do I stay there and keep my hand on a hot stove, or do I take it off? And then once you come to that realization that you know something has to change, then you need to take the actions necessary. And I think so many times we talk about all the things that we want. I want to be in a better relationship. I want a better job. I want to be in better health. I want. I say, well, it's great that you want, but the key question is, what are you willing to do to create the life that you want? And I
Right.
think that for me was what became the light bulb moment when I looked at myself and says, I don't want to live like this anymore. But the question is, but what do you want?
Mhm.
and until we figure out, the question was where am I? How did I get here? But the most important question was, where do I go from here? And that's when I created, and I didn't realize I did it, but that's when I created the RISE framework. That was the framework that I created. It was responsibility, intentionality, strategy, and empowerment. I named it like 2 years ago, but I was living it for 10 years. I didn't realize it until after. I was coaching to all this stuff, and I'm like, wait, hold on. You got to take responsibility for who you are and where you are. You got to make intentional choices. You got to be strategic in your planning and execution. And then you got to empower yourself so you can empower others. So then when you're down, they're going to come and empower you. And it's like, this is common sense. This applies to everything that you do in life. But I wasn't thinking of it that way. I was just, when you're stuck in the storm, right? You're just like trying to protect
Blinders
yourself.
on. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you're covering your head, right? But once you open up and realize that, you know, you you got to believe that you deserve better, but it's not going to happen. The guys I coach, a lot of them say, "Oh, I'm going to pray on that. I'm going to pray on that. I'm going to pray on that." That's great, but faith without action is dead.
You
And I
have to
say,
take the steps to make the difference.
you got to. So, you went back to that original question, like, what would you tell somebody, today? I would say, believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. Again, life's not going to get easier. You're going to make it. You're going to make it what you want it to be. And it's easy for me to say over here, like, right? Oh, this guy, oh yeah, easy. Believe in yourself. No, there was a moment when I didn't believe in myself, but I started doing little things, just taking those little steps. Nothing big. It's not something miraculous. It's not like I went out and won the lottery. I was just picking up pennies, right? Paying bills, changing my lifestyle, getting back to what I knew I was capable of at one point. And I think too, Kelly, as we get older, when we're younger, we have all these dreams and ambitions and ideas of what our life's going to be like. And then you get older and then you realize that, what, most of those things didn't come to fruition. But I'm 55 years old. I look at it this way. I still got 30 good years. What am I going to do with those 30 good years? How am I going to impact the world? How am I going to continue to lead by how I live so that my kids can still have hope?
Well, it sounds like you're well on your way. So
I would hope so.
not that it's a smooth ride going forward, but
It never is.
Nope, life has its ups and downs, that's for sure. So where can people learn more about you, and we can put a link to where they can get your book or whatever in the show notes as well.
On social media, I'm under Coach COACH Sean SEAN Carey CAREY. So that would be Instagram, Facebook, and whatever the other ones are.
LinkedIn.
And I'm SeanCarey.com, where we're updating the website to also put my speakers program on. And then the book that I have out right now is called The Single Dad's Comeback: 6 Steps to Clarity and Resilience. And even though it says single dad, it's appropriate. The information there is appropriate for moms and dads and husbands and wives and single people. It doesn't really matter. It's all applicable. It just happens to be my story and my framework. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up here? I wish I had done a rapid fire session with you, because I think it would have been so fun, and I didn't come up with those questions. So I'll let you close out with anything else that you want to add that maybe we didn't cover.
First, I want to say thank you to you, Kelly, because bringing awareness to mental health, it's needed. And having somebody who is going to go out and not only talk about mental health, but be transparent about it is important. And I think that's, if anything comes out of this conversation, it's let's just go out there and be real, take responsibility for who you are, take responsibility for where you are, but you also can control your future by what you choose to do today. And if it's just one little thing, just do one little thing. One thing that's going to make your life better so that you can leave the legacy that you're capable of for your kids and the people that you love. Because that's how I think about things now, is that, everything that I've done up to this point, I can't change, but I can determine how things are going to play out in some ways in the future by what I choose to do today. And if you're struggling with mental health, ask for help. Reach out your hand, because a lot of times people don't know that you're struggling, or they're afraid to say something to you because they don't want to upset you, or they don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. But if you know somebody else that's struggling, don't be afraid to ask them if they need help. There's no need to suffer alone, right? Pain is temporary, suffering is optional. I know that's a cliche, but think about it. And I'm a testament to that. I was in a box for a long time, and many of those days were days that I chose to stay there. But there's hope. But you need to take the steps necessary.
Yes. A lived experience speaks volumes. Thank you for sharing your story. So Sean, thank you for being willing to have this conversation so openly and honestly, because these are the kind of conversations that matter. And if something in today's episode resonated with you, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not weak for struggling. You're not weak for feeling overwhelmed. And you are absolutely not weak for asking for help. Too many people, especially men, have spent too long believing that they have to carry everything alone. But real strength is not pretending you're okay when you're not. Real strength is being honest enough to say, I need support. That's how conversations begin. That's how connections begin. And sometimes that's how lives are saved. This has been Glow for Hope, sparking conversation on mental health. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on Glow for Hope. If today's conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, your mental wellness matters, and you are never alone. For more resources and support, visit glowforhopenfp.org. That's glowforhopenfp.org. Stay connected, stay hopeful, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep shining.
This podcast does not and is not intended to provide medical advice. The information presented on this podcast should not be interpreted or construed in any way as a replacement or substitution for medical advice. It is important that you discuss your condition, treatment options, or any questions that you may have with your doctor or healthcare provider.